down.
Who are you?
TV Crazy Man here. In this video, let's go back to the future in the 25th century, as seen through the lens of the awesome Buck Rogers series of the late 70s and early 80s.
Your name's Buck, as in Buck Rogers.
So don't give me any of that Dr. Doom jive.
Along the way, we'll discover awesome fun facts and remember great disco moves from the future, and some of those awesome guest stars. We'll try to figure out if Buck and Wilma were actually on the Starfighters or not, or in what order, and lots of other mysterious goofs along the way. And what the heck happened to Twiki's voice in the second season?
I'd be sorry to see the Zicarians pull away.
I'm dead. I'm dead. It's all gone black.
I do not comprehend.
Along the way, we'll look at some of the special effects scenes and find out what Gary Coleman predicted that sadly came true way before the 25th century.
It's going to be fascinating to find out.
Buck Rogers in the 25th century was developed for television by Glen A. Larson and Leslie Stevens. The show used a lot of props that were either used for Battlestar Galactica or were originally developed for that show. The first TV movie was released theatrically and made $21 million, which was a lot of money back then. And this prompted a series to be developed using the first movie as a pilot, with some changes and edits. The pilot was, as in most shows, one of the best of the series, and I love the post-apocalyptic city. I just wish there was more of it later on in the series. Having just rewatched the series, I was left wanting more of the history from the perspective of the 25th century.
Sounds like the Beatles.
The Who?
No, not the Who, the Beatles.
The futuristic New Chicago that was no doubt created by the use of paintings and miniatures was pretty awesome to look at. Even though the effects and props were great, there were a few mysterious goofs. You wonder if someone's actually flying a starfighter at times. A close-up reveals the person flying from the side, but the model shot looks like either no one is flying or the person just happens to be seated too far back to be seen.
Are you all right, mister? There's a starfighter on our tail.
Sometimes it could be difficult to figure out who was sitting where. Like on this episode, we hear Wilma talking to Buck, but we don't see her. Then the next shot makes it appear as if Buck is alone. From the next side view, Wilma is nowhere to be seen. Then once the ship comes into the atmosphere, we see that nobody is in the starfighter. And finally, we see Wilma sitting right next to Buck where she was not at before.
That's impossible.
Of course, there's a possibility that Wilma was hiding in the back and then she changed seats with Buck while they were being chased and fired upon by another starfighter.
I don't understand.
Mixing stock footage could sometimes cause confusion, like in the second episode when Wilma Deering, played by Erin Gray, is captured and placed on a shuttle. It changes in mid-flight, possibly I believe to a shuttle seen on Battlestar Galactica. With bigger television sets and clearer images, the times that actor Gil Gerard used a stunt double has become pretty obvious at times, like from this scene from the same episode, Planet of the Slave Girls. There's a really cool scene in this episode featuring the 1939 movie serial Buck Rogers actor Buster Crabbe. Here he plays Brigadier Gordon. Gordon tells Rogers, "I've been doing this since before you were born."
You think so?
Young man, I know so.
The name Brigadier Gordon is a reference to Crabbe's other famous role as Flash Gordon in several movie serials. He also played Tarzan in 1933. Now, Twiki is Buck's robot, and is voiced by Looney Tunes legend Bugs Bunny himself, Mel Blanc.
Buck taught me all I know.
Twiki loves using old 20th century sayings that he learned from Buck Rogers.
It's in the bag. What a bummer. Eat lead, sucker.
Coincidentally, Mel was also the voice of Daffy Duck as Duck Dodgers, whom he first voiced in 1953, of whom was a parody of Buck Rogers, of course.
Groovy. Get down.
Nothing was quite as unsettling as when Mel Blanc was temporarily replaced by another voice actor in the second season due to illness.
Yep, that's right. I don't understand why you keep getting angry with one another.
Seems like they could have gotten somebody that kind of sounded the same at least.
Tisk tisk.
One word out of you, I turn you into a can opener.
Mel did come back after a few episodes, but by this time Twiki's role in the series had been greatly diminished. So of course Mel couldn't fit into the suit, so they had to get actor Felix Sela to be the physical representation of Twiki. He was also famous for the role of Cousin It from the Addams Family. Twiki had to carry around another robotic intelligence named Dr. Theopolis. He was a member of a council that programmed everything in the city. Why a body for Theopolis couldn't be created, I never really understood.
Everything's copacetic.
Copa what?
In the episode Vegas in Space, Twiki pulls off what looks like an unintentional magic trick. Items are taken off of Twiki's tray until there's nothing left. But by the end, the camera points at Buck, and then watch what happens when it comes back to Twiki in his magic tray.
But somebody's got to do it.
What a guy.
From this to this, right before your eyes.
It really isn't as difficult as you think it is, Wilma.
Did Buck just call Wilma Marla, another female character in this episode? Kind of hard to tell. You be the judge on this one.
It really isn't as difficult as you think it is, Wilma. It really isn't as difficult as you think it is, Wilma.
Complete technical schematics for the hatchet fighters.
Interesting technology for storing schematics in the 25th century. It looks like a cassette from an old answering machine. As it says in the good book, there's nothing new under the sun. If disco is still around, then maybe cassette tapes will make a comeback as well. Of course, I can't really tell if they're dancing or trying to knit a very large sweater. Vegas in Space guest stars, as we've seen, Cesar Romero, who played the Joker in Batman. But there were more stars from Batman that would appear in the first season, such as Roddy McDowall, who played the Bookworm, Frank Gorshen, the Riddler, and Julie Newmar, who of course was Catwoman. It's interesting that when Buck makes a remark about his run-in with Gorshen's character in a later episode, he says this.
You wouldn't waste time with these riddles.
Here's another Stuntman sighting. In the episode that guest stars Frank Gorshen, The Plot to Kill a City, there's one scene I think is worth mentioning that's kind of weird. Buck escapes 25th century jail, and he throws the weirdest smoke bomb that I've ever seen. And that's almost all I know to say about it, other than I think it was really meant to be very psychedelic.
We'll discuss it later.
Markie Post from The Fall Guy and Night Court was also in that episode, wearing a cool-looking futuristic costume. This episode also puts Buck Rogers into the DC Comics universe. Listen to the announcement on the PA system.
Dr. Adam Strange from Alpha Centauri, Flight 8.
There they are.
Anagar.
The message is for Adam Strange and mentions Alpha Centauri, the star system that the DC Comics hero travels to on a regular basis. The other message was about the planet Thanagar, home of the superhero Hawkman, which is kind of coincidental that Buck Rogers would introduce a Birdman named Hawk in the second season.
Dr. Adam Strange from Alpha Centauri, Flight 8.
There they are.
Anagar.
On the episode Return of the Fighting 69th, this evil lady has a metal hand she'd gotten from a fire. But when she pulls it away, we see a short miracle happen for just a second, as her hand is completely restored. But then it's back to metal the next second. It went from this to this. Probably a reshoot, I guess. On the episode Unchained Woman, Buck has to break out guest star Jamie Lee Curtis from a prison while being chased by a robot with bionic vision and super strength. They must not make rocks out of the same material on this planet. It appears to have the weight of cardboard. Did you notice how it seems like it almost floats in the air for a second? The way they simulated super strength here was by simply not attaching the fence to the wall, which of course makes it a lot easier to knock down. On the episode Planet of Amazon Women, with no Linda Carter in sight, these two women capture Buck in an effort to replace the men that have been lost on the planet. Another Buck Rogers Stuntman sighting, and then Buck gets zapped. The weird thing is, it looks like he got himself into the zap position before he actually got zapped. I wonder, did Buck want to get captured? On the episode, Cosmic Whiz Kid, Different Strokes Gary Coleman, and My Favorite Martian's Ray Walston guest star. Coleman is a child genius from the 20th century that had himself frozen and was awakened in the 25th century and made president of a colony. Ray Walston is the bad guy. He could easily be playing Uncle Martin from My Favorite Martian, only maybe he's gotten evil over time. And Martians do have a very long lifespan, if you'll recall. There's another stuntman sighting in this episode that's pretty noticeable, maybe even in old TV sets. You know, I know the prevailing wisdom is that most of these things weren't noticeable on old TVs, but I'm almost sure my dad used to point out stuff like this all the time when I was a kid. Later, when Buck and Coleman's guard come across a lawn protected by a photon shield, they deactivate it. But it seems like it would have been safer to just walk around instead. It looks like they had a nice sidewalk they could have used.
Once in a while, I kind of miss the way things were, don't you?
At the end of the episode, Gary Coleman's character makes a prediction that has sadly come to pass. Coleman's character lists all the things he missed from the 20th century, and the last one is...
Saturday morning cartoons.
Yes, and we now know that Saturday morning cartoons are a thing of the past, at least on the major networks. Now technically you can watch cartoons anytime you like, thanks to streaming services, cable channels, and DVDs. But it is interesting that Coleman would predict no more Saturday morning cartoons in the future, because he would have his own cartoon series that lasted one season in 1982, where he was an angel trying to earn his wings.
I miss cheeseburgers and comic books.
Yeah, honestly, it's not looking too good for comic books these days either. At least not the new ones.
Once in a while, I kind of miss the way things were, don't you?
Princess Ardala returns in the episode Escape from Wedded Bliss. Pamela Hensley played Ardala, who wanted Buck Rogers as her husband, or was it slave? I was never quite sure. She was evil, of course, and yet you almost felt sorry for her at times. If it weren't for Wilma, I could see Ardala turning good and getting hooked up with Buck. But spoiler, we don't even see Wilma and Buck get together. As the series progresses, there's just a little hint here and there that they might be a thing. As far as Princess Ardala goes, she made no appearances in the second season at all. The last episode of the first season with guest star Julie Newmar was the last we ever saw of her. In the episode Wedded Bliss, Buck has to knock the princess out in order to escape. But even though she's totally zonked out, I noticed that she still manages to hang on to Buck's neck. In the big fight scene with Tiger Man, Buck loses his belt in the fight, but only for a split second. And you will be happy to know that disco skating will make a comeback in the 25th century. In the episode Space Vampire, Wilma is zapped by a vampire with a big brain.
You may come to me now.
I think this vampire has been around a long time because it appears as if he's got a 20th century wristwatch on. Also, his power kind of sounds like a video game, but I can't put my finger on which one it is. Well, the good news is, even if they don't have cartoons and comic books, it looks like they have arcade games in the future. And happy birthday, Buck. I've got to ask this question. Does Buck really need to cut his way out of this one? Seems like he could just pull his hands out easy if he wanted to. Princess Ardala returned with Buck Rogers' robots.
At ease, Captains Rogers.
They used a very convincing split-screen effect here. That's pretty neat considering how close they had to get Buck Rogers next to himself like this. They basically had to do 3 shots of him and lay the film down upon one another in layers. They used stand-ins for the back shot, most likely because Princess Ardala was in the way, and a split screen might have cut her in half. Although they might have gotten away with splitting the screen off at the last stand-in by moving Rogers over farther. Here's a split screen from I Dream of Jeannie that shows the kind of issues they ran into back in the day. Notice the woman's hand goes out of her side of the split screen and partially disappears. Of course, stand-ins work great, except the last guy seemed skinnier and had shorter hair than Rogers. Also in this episode was Michael Ansara, who played Kane, Ardala's right-hand man, in 3 episodes. He was in the classic Outer Limits episode Soldier with Tim O'Connor, who was Dr. Huer on Buck Rogers. In the episode, Twiki is missing. Buck and Twiki are getting hammered in a sonic chamber. Buck opts to lift Twiki up to disable it, but it left me wondering, would it not have been easier to either keep on going out of range or just pick up his ray gun and zap it, since it was probably a lot lighter than Twiki was. Also in this episode, Buck is knocked down with a psychic blast from Anne Marie Martin, who would later partner up with Sledgehammer. The episode A Dream of Jennifer really stood out to me, as it gave us a chance to see Buck's past and see more of Buck's character. In it, he sees what looks like his long-lost love from the 20th century, a mystery that doesn't end well for Buck. It guest stars Battlestar Galactica's Anne Lockhart, daughter of Lost in Space's June Lockhart. The second season started a little late due to a writer's strike. It began in January of 1981. Viewers saw a lot of changes thrown at them all at once. The first thing was the intro now had replaced the voice of William Conrad as the narrator.
The year is 1987.
NASA launched the last of America's deep space probes.
Conrad was famous for his detective show and, of course, as the narrator of Rocky and Bullwinkle. He had a legendary narrative voice.
Returns Buck Rogers to Earth 500 years later.
They replaced him with Hank Sims, who was also very good, but I didn't really see a reason to make that change.
To return Buck Rogers to Earth 500 years later.
Buck and Wilma are suddenly a part of the crew of the ship Searcher on a mission to find the lost tribes of Earth, mixing Star Trek with Battlestar Galactica. A new cranky robot was introduced named Crichton, and Buck got a Mr. Spock-like sidekick named Hawk, a half-bird man who at first hates humans. And as mentioned before, Twiki's voice was temporarily changed due to Mel Blanc being ill. They replaced Tim O'Connor's character, Dr. Elias Huer, with Dr. Goodfellow, played by Wilfred Hyde White. It was disappointing to not have Tim O'Connor return. To me, he will always be the alien Andros from the first season of Wonder Woman. But he was a great actor, so it puzzles me as to why they would want to replace him. Another new character they added was the Admiral of the Searcher, played by Jay Garner. On the episode Journey to Oasis, Mark Lenard guest starred as Ambassador Duvall. He is best known as the actor who played Spock's dad on Star Trek. In this episode, he was from an alien race that could remove his head and put it back on, of course. Notice how the head goes from real to plastic looking. The same thing happened on the $6 Million Man when they removed the head from the fake Oscar. On the close-up, it's obvious, of course, that the actor just has his hands on his head, as if he were actually holding it up. But it's the first part with the pulled-up collar and the fake head that really sells it. I always prefer seeing outside shots to the in-studio shots, where sometimes you can see where the sky actually ends. And other times, the sky is wrinkled or creased. And the creases are definitely a symptom of better screens allowing us to see what we weren't supposed to notice, but I still think the outside shots are much better.
It's an earthquake, a big one, on the ground, everybody.
Here's a question for you. If you're on another planet that starts to quake, is it still an earthquake, or should it be whatever planet you are on quake? Also, I hear Wilma in this scene, but I don't see her lips moving.
It's an earthquake, a big one, on the ground, everybody.
Season 2's Testimony of a Traitor was a particularly fun episode. I really like seeing Buck deal with his past. I did have a question though. In the scene where they put a brain scanner on Buck to see his actual memories, shouldn't we be seeing the action from his eyes and not the camera's? Probably not as easy to follow that way, but it just hit me while I was watching it. I've just watched both seasons recently, and I think that both seasons have their strong points. The first is probably a little more fun in some ways, sort of campy. It leaves you wanting to know more about the 25th century. The second performs better story-wise, but I do wish they hadn't just plopped us down in the middle of it, and I wish they'd created an episode or two bridging the two seasons together. I also wish that they hadn't got rid of Tim O'Connor. Now, it's too bad the show didn't last longer. I would have loved to have seen what might have happened to Buck and the rest of the gang in a third season. So tell me what you think in the comments. Which season was your favorite? And what were your favorite memories of the show? Check out my other videos. If you enjoyed this one, you might like my videos on Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica. So check those out. Please don't forget to hit the like, subscribe if you haven't already for more classic TV goofs, facts, and fun memories. Y'all have a great day.